Now the story of the Jewish exiles who lost everything, and the one man who had no choice but to help them rebuild it. It's the book of Nehemiah. How stupid an idea do you think it is for me to open an episode with COVID as an example? 1 out of 10. You can just scream the number to the heavens right now. Oh my gosh, you're all saying like 8s and 9s. Well, now I'm committed. I'm married to it because I already said I was going to do it. So this is going to happen. Hey, y'all remember COVID? It was awful. This is a horrible, horrible thing that we all went through very recently. There was disease and suffering and uncertainty and fighting and even death. Every single one of you who is hearing this was touched by the whole COVID thing. And I'm not going to give in to the temptation to offer a whole bunch of opinions about how the things ought to be or should have been. Some of them are probably going to leak through because I can't help it, but I'm not trying to let them leak through. Someday, there'll be a big conversation about all of that when we're all in a little better place with each other, and I think there will be a lot of wisdom to be gleaned from an honest evaluation of what we got right and what we got wrong. Da-da-da-da-da, that'll be super. That's not what I want to talk about. What I do want to talk about is something that is a little more nonpartisan, neutral, and that affected everybody, and that is the economic side of this thing. Very shortly after the initial 2 weeks to flatten the curve thing, you started to hear rumblings from people living paycheck to paycheck who were like, hey, 2 weeks, okay, we can kind of do that, but this isn't going to keep working. I have to go back to work. We have to eat. I can't pay my bills like this. And with each passing week, that outcry rose through the respective tax brackets until a pretty significant percentage of society was saying, this isn't going to work. We got to change our mitigation approach. We got to do something differently because the bills aren't getting paid. We have a bona fide crisis on our hands, and the government tried printing money, and we can't really get on our partisan high horse about that one because both parties printed a ton of money. And of course, that has had very damaging effects on the economy. I mean, you print a lot of money, you get a lot of inflation, and that's been a pretty bitter pill for, I think, everybody to swallow, regardless of what tax bracket you happen to be in. And as I'm sitting here recording this, that's something we're still trying to sort out and figure out how to fix. And that's part of why I wanted to bring up this example, is because it's something that we not just recently feel, we all currently, as I am sitting at this microphone, feel the effects of a pressing crisis that was felt culture-wide, civilization-wide, really just about worldwide, and that had massive economic ramifications such that we really found ourselves in a place where we had two values in conflict. One was, you got to mitigate this disease. You got to do something about it. And the other was, hey, the destruction of the economy is getting close to outpacing the danger of the disease. We have to fire this thing back up. You can't just turn off an economy and then turn it back on. Look, if you get that, and I realize it's a super risky analogy and example to bring up because we're all still raw about it, but I do think this is one of the rare places where we can really freshly and recently empathize with the situation that is on the page in the Bible, in the passage we're looking at. We're in the book of Nehemiah. The Jewish exiles, they got taken into captivity 140 years before the stuff we're looking at in Nehemiah. But then over the course of the last few generations, leading up to the part of the Bible that we're looking at here, the Jewish exiles are being allowed to go home under the leadership of the Persian kings, and they've rebuilt the temple, and slowly they've rebuilt Jerusalem, and they, somewhere along the lines, kind of made do with sort of some walls, but the walls are a mess. They're broken down. The gates are destroyed. They got enemies at the gates. It's a long way from the home office of Persia, and they are in danger of losing the ground they've taken. The entire prospect of the Jewish people being reestablished as a people is on a razor's edge. If they can get those walls built and the gates in place, they can rise to their feet and no longer be returning exiles, but be returned exiles. But if they can't get those walls built, we've already seen that the enemies are licking their chops, and the whole prospect will fall off the other direction, and they will be defeated, destroyed, forgotten to history. Their new generation of enemies will accomplish what Haman was unable to accomplish a generation earlier, thwarted by the bravery and courage of Esther and Mordecai by the providence of God. So here we are in Nehemiah 5, with really a COVID corollary. There is a crisis that is so pressing and so right now that everything else has to be set aside. The enemies are quite literally at the gates seeking the destruction of the Jewish people. But by the grace of God, Nehemiah was in a position to petition the King of Kings, Artaxerxes of Persia. And for just a moment here, the Jews have the favor of the Persians. They have enough resources. They've got a second here where if they can get this wall built, they will again become not returning exiles, but returned exiles. So it's crisis. It's a right now thing. It's urgent. Everything else gets set aside. And we see that in Nehemiah chapter 3. Remember, it's kind of the boring chapter that we went through, where it was like, and then Ted built this part of the wall. And then Ronnie, the garbage man, and his family built the part of the wall that was by the garbage man house. And then Gary and Sheila, the perfumers, rebuilt the dung tower, and so on and so forth all the way through. Well, what we see in chapter 3 is these are normal people with normal jobs. Well, guess what they ain't doing while they're rebuilding this wall? Working, running their businesses, collecting revenues, the same thing you weren't doing and I wasn't doing when COVID was in full swing. Now, just like a little bit after 2 weeks to flatten the curve in 2020, we start to hear the rumblings of injustice. We start to hear people who are in a vulnerable economic situation saying, hey, this is getting desperate. We want to get the wall built. We want to stop the disease, but something has to be done here, or we're going to starve and die and fail as a family, fail as a people. This is how that goes. Nehemiah 5:1. Now the men and their wives raised a great outcry against their Jewish brothers. Some were saying, we and our sons and daughters are numerous. In order for us to eat and stay alive, we must get grain. That is justice outcry number 1. Here's number 2. Others were saying, we're mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our homes to get grain during the famine. Whew, okay, that escalated. Here's outcry number 3. Still others were saying, we've had to borrow money to pay the king's tax on our fields and vineyards, and although we're of the same flesh and blood as our countrymen, and though our sons are as good as theirs, yet we have to subject our sons and daughters to slavery. Some of our daughters have already been enslaved, but we're powerless because our fields and our vineyards belong to others. Wow. I don't know about you, but I had no idea it was that bad just reading through the first 4 chapters. I mean, you're getting this from the perspective of Nehemiah. I guess his needs are met. He's clearly declined to profit off of this situation. He makes it really clear, I mean, what we've seen already and what we see later, that he was not being opportunistic. He was not trying to seize the crisis to get more for himself. He was very sacrificial, but from Nehemiah's perspective through 4 chapters, I just didn't know it was this bad. Now look, when the COVID thing happened, no matter who you are, there was somebody who experienced the thing differently. And when you first heard their take on it, or their complaints, or their cries for justice, you were like, I don't really resonate with that. That's not how I'm encountering this. I mean, everybody, no matter who you are, or what you thought, or what you went through, there was some response to it that seemed very foreign to you. There were others that seemed more like your experience, my experience, and it was easier to be empathetic to that. But that disparity between empathy and sort of feeling not particularly attached to some cries for justice was the reality for you and me because we were living through it. We were experiencing it differently in real time. This crisis in Nehemiah chapter 5 is easier for us to be empathetic toward because we don't have skin in the game. We're not there. Stuff's okay in our world. Things were not okay in their world. And my guess is that your very human, empathetic heart heard these outcries, these 3 pleas for justice that I just reeled off. And I'm guessing it was pretty easy for you to think to yourself, dang, those are valid complaints. I had no idea it was that bad. Seriously, they don't have grain? Now you remember, right? That grain and wine are the main currency in the Persian Empire at this time. I mean, you eat the main thing that is your currency. So the very thing that represents wealth is also the thing that you need to consume in order to stay alive. And you probably need to consume a little more of in order to have energy to defend yourself against people who want to kill you while simultaneously rebuilding a wall. These are desperate times. Now, on the one hand, you could say, well, Nehemiah should have just put in a call to Artaxerxes and had him lift the taxes. Yeah, but Nehemiah already kind of played his hand. And that is a very slow solution to a very quick problem. This is a situation that requires an immediate resolution, a local resolution. I mean, even at the lowest level of crisis, the crisis is we can't eat. That's a big deal. But the secondary level of crisis, it's we're giving up our businesses. Like, hey, we all want to fight the disease. We all want to fight the not walls problem, but I'm about to lose my business. What am I trying to get walls up for? What am I trying to stop the disease for if I can't eat afterwards? But then the third one, those of you who are parents, I'm betting that third one is hitting you about as hard as it's hitting me. The idea of your children being sold into slavery. Some of our daughters have already been enslaved. What does that mean? Read between the lines, friends. Think about how desperate this situation is. And we'll break down the desperation that we're looking at here more carefully tomorrow, and I won't linger here long because this was a bleak episode. I want to get past this. I want to understand the cry for justice. I want to understand how we got there, but I quickly want to turn the page into what the solution is. It's a huge test of Nehemiah's leadership. And if the most basic objective here is get the wall up, well, obviously that is hugely in danger of failing now. But if another basic objective of being a temporary governor is don't have all your people die of starvation, well, now that is in play as well. Nehemiah's got his work cut out for him, and we'll break it down. Sometimes I think there's a dangerous way to approach a given episode and a safe way to approach a given episode, and the safe way gets it done. Other times, clearly, I run the calculation. I'm like, you know what? Let's just do the risky one because I think it's going to help us empathize with the text and understand what people are going through better. Obviously, I chose the safe one this time because, wow, you would not believe how risky the risky one that I did not go with was. You all would have been so much more offended. It was really, really bad. I'm glad we just went with COVID. Okay, I'm Matt. This is a 10-minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.